Horses have been spotted being actively used in the Russo-Ukrainian War, including in 2026, and this is actually not as crazy as it seems. Hold on, before you dislike the video and tell me to eat a grenade, I am not implying that the next stage of modern warfare is infantry fixing bayonets and forming square while masses of cavalry charge with sabers lowered. In this video, I am here to make the argument that the appearance of horses on the modern day battlefield in its current roles is not some kind of crazy outlandish idea and actually does make a decent amount of sense, at least on paper, as of course theory and practical application don't always go hand in hand. But first I need to address something very important, and so please bear with me. A few years ago, there was training footage of Chinese soldiers shooting the new QBZ-191 that went viral, at least in the military analysis community. It showed Chinese soldiers at a shoot house firing the rifle and the impact of the rounds having a notable keyhole shape. As you can imagine, bullets aren't supposed to go sideways when hitting a target, and so some people lost their minds. They started making claims like, "Ha! Look at those silly Chinese people who don't know how to make a rifle," except there was one small problem with that assessment. Notice the weak ejection patterns of the casings, notice the close quarters shooting on what looks like a concrete structure, notice the different cartridges being used in this scenario compared to actual live rounds, which come in a green lacquered case. Yeah, these Chinese soldiers were firing rubber training bullets, not actual live rounds meant for combat. And that makes a lot of sense that A, you would not want to tear up the shoot house, as many soldiers are also going to be training in it, and B, you might not want to fire live rounds into concrete 10 meters away from your face unless you want to die by a ricochet. And while early production of the 5.8mm cartridge for the QBZ-191 was indeed copper washed, this has been already phased out, and furthermore, pay attention to the weak ejection patterns compared to actual live rounds, alongside the circumstance in which they are training. This was really not something that hard to figure out. Never mind the fact that there is plenty of footage of live rounds being shot out of the QBZ-191 that function perfectly fine, and having different types of rounds for different purposes is literally something that every major military has. In fact, in the United States military, there are times where you aren't even using blanks or some kind of simunition. You are literally screaming bang bang at the top of your lungs. I am not joking. So, how did people jump to this crazy conclusion that China can't design a rifle despite all the evidence pointing towards these rounds being special rounds for training? Because when it comes to military analysis, history, or anything that requires nuance, there are two types of people: the analyst and the chauvinist. The analyst tries their best to use the information available to investigate a certain topic or issue, trying their best to put their own biases aside and to be as objective as possible. That doesn't mean the analyst is never wrong and has zero bias. In fact, in a previous video, I said that Ukrainians were using DJI drones for reconnaissance in 2026. That is outdated information, and instead they use their own homegrown drones. I was rightfully corrected, and I will do better, by a Ukrainian engineer who specialized in drones by the name of Alexander. I am saying this because I am not here trying to act holier than everyone else. All I mean by quote-unquote analysts is that they strive to investigate and not jump to conclusions, which is also what I strive to be. The second type is the chauvinist. They are propagandists, or cheerleaders if that term is too inflammatory. They don't give a shit about understanding anything. They're here to say that the side I like is the best, and it's the best because it's the best. The chauvinist sees soldiers shooting in a shoot house with keyholes, and instead of investigating and frankly thinking a little bit, they turn their brains off and jump to conclusions because they really don't care about any of this stuff. They're just here to cheerlead. I am not here to start drama. In fact, notice how I didn't mention a single name, and so if you thought about a certain individual while I was giving my spiel, that says more about them than anything I have to say. Whether or not you want to be the analyst or chauvinist is up to you, as I am not your parent, albeit I do hope you strive to be the former unless you wish to become a loyal disciple of Crassus and follow in his footsteps. The reason why I am saying all of this is because if you are the chauvinist, you are not going to like this video or this channel for that matter, and you might as well stop watching the video now. out. And for all those still here, as a wise man once said, there is no conclusion without investigation, and so let us investigate why horses are still being used on the modern day battlefield. While there have been horses spotted in Ukraine being used for transportation as early as February of 2025, one of the earliest pieces of footage of horses and their riders being actively targeted by drones is in the Sumy region, which was recorded by the 132nd Separate Reconnaissance Battalion, a branch of Ukraine's air assault forces, in July of 2025, with horses being spotted in numerous areas such as near the city of Provgorsk, the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, and at the time the Zaporizhia and Zversk fronts. I apologize for my pronunciation. There have also been photos of horses being used as platforms for Starlink, a satellite-based internet, utilized to move alongside an infantry element to provide internet in more remote or harder to reach areas. According to the Chief of Staff of the 4th Operational Battalion of Ukraine, Russian forces periodically turn on their Starlink in order to stream their location through their issued phones, and then the command guides them through a live feed to relay information such as where they need to go. The important takeaway from these spottings is that horses are being used for transportation, infiltration, logistics, and border guard work, not in direct active combat roles, or at least not at the time of me recording this. And yes, there was a viral video of 2 Russian soldiers on horseback galloping through an open field near the city of Olavzivka while being targeted by drones, which was only a couple hundred meters from the front at that time. However, it seemed like these soldiers were trying to cross the field as fast as they could and use their horses to transport themselves close to the contact line or to a staging area or whatever, rather than trying to conduct some kind of crazy cavalry charge assault firing rifles like modern day horse archers. As 2 people on horseback is not exactly the epitome of shock and awe if the plan was to punch straight through the enemy lines. And while there have been training footage of what looks like to be mounted Russian troops practicing storming positions on horseback, there has yet to be actual combat footage of mounted troops firing rifles into enemy positions while jumping over trenches like it's a scene from War Horse. What this means is that I will not be analyzing how effective horses are in direct infantry engagements, as that is not what they are currently being used for. Instead, the better question is to ask how effective they are as means of transportation alongside pros and cons of using horses on the battlefield versus alternatives. And so, with that being said, let's talk about the horse itself. I have seen numerous people talk about how the use of horses is due to Russia's shortage of motorized vehicles, at least in the regions where horses are being utilized. Now, that can be true. However, the issue I have with this framing is that it implies that horses are some kind of cheaper or easier alternative than a buggy, ATV, or scooter, when that is absolutely not the case. First of all, horses are not cheap, and while I by no means claim to be an equestrian or some kind of horse expert, I do know that utilizing a horse in real life is not as easy as going up to it and feed it a few carrots and apples, popping a saddle onto it, and then riding off into the sunset like it is Minecraft. Horses need to be trained, not just to ride on, but trained to not spook easily under battlefield conditions, such as being exposed to loud noises like gunfire, explosions, or drones. Horses are not low maintenance, and while they don't require diesel or gasoline, they do need to be fed, especially in the wintertime when food sources are more scarce. They also need to be groomed and sheltered, so on and so forth. Beyond training, they need to be bred if you want more of them, or acquired, but then also trained, because horses don't naturally come with the ability to be ridden into the battlefield without spooking. If injured, they need time to heal or to be put down if the injury is bad enough, which is a much slower process than patching up a vehicle that took some light shrapnel. Horses also get sick and have all the other nuances associated with a live animal. A scooter does not, and that's just the horse. Horse riding is a skill, especially if you're not just going to be going on a nature trail looking at butterflies, but entering a hostile battlefield environment. Troops need to be trained in riding, taking care of the horse, so on and so forth. And while horses have legs, they still need to be transported at least somewhat close to the front line to preserve their energy and obviously speed up their arrival and use. On top of all of that, horses have a notable larger heat signature that make them more vulnerable to being spotted by thermal drones, not to mention that the rider is on top and therefore more exposed to enemy fire and shrapnel. Nor are the horses themselves shrapnel proof. proof. And so clearly there is another reason for why horses are being used in the modern day battlefield. And sure, while a shortage of motorized vehicles can be one of those reasons, that alone does not explain why a creature that does have notable costs and nuances tied to it is being fielded. And so why horses? Horses are mostly all-terrain. They can navigate through dense foliage, mud, sharp inclines such as mountains, and even at night, as horses do have natural night vision, and can definitely see better than a guy riding an ATV at night with no night vision, especially when roads and terrain are marked by shell craters, debris, and other potholes and shit you don't want to trip on. But I hear some of you may be asking, if horses are so good off-road, then why do we see so much footage of horses being targeted on roads? To that I have to say, A, there is survivorship bias with the footage being released, as you are most likely going to be seeing successful or presumably successful attacks on mounted soldiers, but you are not going to see Russians on horses successfully slipping into their lines, as well they weren't spotted. And B, while horses are better off-road in more diverse environments, horses still go faster on roads. I mean, there's a reason why roads predate motorized vehicles. And while I obviously can't read the minds of the people in this footage, I presume their plan was to follow the road for as long as they could before veering off-road and heading towards whatever position they were going towards. And it did not work out for them, but hey, nobody is claiming that horses are invulnerable to attacks. And as horses are obviously living creatures, they are also able to detect the presence of strangers sooner than a human and have their own instinct when feeling that something is wrong. Something that the rider can utilize to increase their own awareness, as attested to by the 19th Territorial Defense Brigade of Poland, who have mounted soldiers. None of this is new information. In fact, the United States military has also used horses in active combat zones for transportation and logistics due to the all-terrain nature of horses, being able to go places where traditional wheeled vehicles cannot. A famous example of this comes from the story of 12 Green Berets with the 5th Special Forces Group's Operational Detachment Alpha 595, in which they use horses guided by locals in the mountainous regions of Afghanistan to accomplish their mission. I mean, there was even a movie made about this, although it has a significant Hollywood liberties, shall I say. It is not a documentary. Hell, the Marine Corps has a special class to train people how to ride horses. Now, before someone says it, yes, Afghanistan and the Russo-Ukrainian War are completely different conflicts, with the latter being conventional warfare and obviously having advancements in drone and other technology, alongside having completely different terrain. Albeit, mud and mountains both have their own unique challenges in which horses can be applied to solve. Nor am I here trying to imply that a tactic is only valid if the United States or Western forces use it. I am bringing this up to say that the idea of using horses in transportation and logistics is not this crazy, outlandish idea akin to telling soldiers to start volley firing in the open. There is some actual sense to the use of horses. Even if you did have an ATV to use or some kind of motorized vehicle, is it really that much better than a horse if it gets stuck in the mud in the middle of your journey or the start of it? Horses are slower than an ATV on open road, absolutely, but they are most definitely faster than an ATV deep in the mud. While horses have a notable heat signature, they also have less noise and ruckus being produced, especially in the current tactics we see in the more recent years of the Russo-Ukrainian War. Small unit infiltration, small groups of men penetrating into enemy lines and causing havoc, doing so in order to avoid detection, as being stealthier is more favorable than an all-out assault that causes the enemy to focus all their firepower on you. And this leads into one of the most important and main reasons why horses are being fielded: energy conservation. Forced marches in the military are one of the physically hardest and most exhausting things you can do. This isn't going to Runyon Canyon and doing a nature walk, or hiking up a big hill and snapping a picture for your Instagram while holding up a fancy water bottle. You are going to march with everything you need for whatever mission you're going on, from sustainment to ammunition to body armor and so on and so forth. And sure, if you have a vehicle with you, you can put some of that gear on that, but again, mud and all that. Furthermore, as each step you take in the open increases your chances of being spotted and eliminated, you are not strolling and smelling sunflowers either. You are most likely going to be marching at an uncomfortable pace to the point where you are almost jogging. Now do this for hours and hours and miles upon miles, all the time having to observe and listen for enemy drones, ambushes, traps, and when you get to your destination, you aren't just going to be sipping on cucumber water while sunbathing. You might have to then fight an active battle or then retreat the same distance you came came from if overwhelmed. You can be the best marksman in the world, the sharpest tool in the shed, but try operating at peak efficiency while you have just force marched with 10 blisters, are sleep deprived, and your entire body is exhausted. As callous as it sounds, it does make sense to ride a horse as far as you can while saving your energy, so that if you do come under attack, you have the, well, energy to run or fight and not drop dead from exhaustion. And also the fact that if the horse does step on an anti-personnel mine, there is a standoff distance so that the rider can most likely avoid serious injuries. And yes, I know that people are going to bring up the ethics of using a horse for this role, as it is a living creature, and I love animals, and it brings me no joy to see animals or people killed. However, and I'm not trying to be a dick when I say this, but this is not the first time horses have been killed on the battlefield. I sometimes see comments like, "Look how sick these Russians are sending horses to the slaughter." And while you're more than welcome to feel however you want about the use of horses on the battlefield, this is not some kind of new phenomenon, and frankly, irrelevant when considering the practical application of horses on the battlefield. And speaking of practical application of horses, Ukraine has also used horses, according to Ukrainian Special Forces Commander of Artan, part of the defense intelligence of Ukraine, while being interviewed by Ukraine's Army TV. He recalls an operation in which 5 horses were used, as deep infiltration was involved and stealth was key. What this meant is that they could not rely on loud motorized vehicles, which also produced their own electronic signature. The issue was that these men had to spend days in enemy territory as an independent element and could not be easily resupplied. As a solution, horses carrying supplies and equipment were used to walk alongside the infantry, who could now carry more provisions to sustain themselves for the days they had to spend as an independent element. And so horses, and mules for that matter, have a practical role that we see being used on both sides for carrying, well, supplies and equipment. And another advantage of horses is that they do better off-road, like I was saying, but more so when roads and obvious avenues of approach are being constantly surveilled by drones. And so the question isn't, is the horse the absolute best option, but would you rather get as far as you can on horseback or walk on foot? This all comes back to me saying that the use of horses, and mules for that matter, is not as crazy as it sounds on paper. And I say on paper because while I do think there are reasons behind the use of horses that do make a lot of sense in niche contexts, I also don't think that militaries adopting horses en masse is the next stage of modern warfare. And so let's talk about the future of horses. I waited so long to make this video because I wanted to see if horses would make more of an appearance on the battlefield in 2026. And we do see horses still being fielded, but keep in mind that it is hard to judge the extent and scale of use looking at just publicly released footage, due to released footage having their own agenda and biases, as this is still an ongoing conflict. An area I see horses being consistently fielded, if not increased, is border guard work. The men conducting patrols in often more remote and rugged areas can do so on horseback, with the nature of such work giving the rider more access to care for the horse versus using it near the contact line of a conventional conflict and making caring for the horse much more complicated. That being said, we have seen an increase in drones being used to transport supplies to the front, and while this method of logistics is not perfect and drones can also get stuck or malfunction, fielding drones for delivering things is less costly than training and riding a horse strapped with supplies. On the other hand, horses are still capable of navigating terrain that wheeled vehicles cannot. What this means is that I do believe that horses will continue to have niche roles on the battlefield alongside being used when the only alternative is going on foot. However, as drone technology continues to develop not just in the air but also on land, I believe it will ultimately come down to the ability to traverse muddy and other hard to navigate terrain alongside the costs associated with the horses and their alternatives. If you like this video, please feel free to check out my other military tactic breakdowns alongside history videos and gaming videos, where I like to include some educational and history segments within them. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.